Mr. Bret BEDINGHAUS, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Do you know what a Drogon's decoder wheel is?
I don't, but it is very intriguing.
Do you remember decoder wheels in general? Like they used to come in cereal boxes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that must have been a thing of you guys' time because
of days of yore.
I either didn't buy the right cereal that came in or I didn't get a decoder wheel.
Aww.
I would have been super stoked about that too because I loved Spy Gear and
well, they're generally used most often to decode triple scrambled microwave transmissions
between two soldiers talking in Mandarin Chinese.
Well, the Chinese were only using a simple polyphonetically grouped 20 square digit key transposed in booster photonic form with multiple nulls. Broke it with this.
A Drogon's decoder wheel? They put these things into cereal boxes for kids.
Yeah, I found it in a box of Lucky Charms.
There you go. Something of that nature. Yeah, it's from Spies Like Us. Dan Aykroyd's character.
Oh,
we watched it somewhat recently.
A couple months ago, right?
Yeah, maybe a year, but...
Really?
Yeah. Spies Like Us. Speaking of the power of sound, that movie and Fletch, Bret and I used to go to sleep to many nights in the room, and I would just listen to it. Just audio. I mean, it'd be on, but I wouldn't watch it a lot.
I bet something like that was probably kind of reminiscent, like, to hearing the radio, like a radio version of that, you know?
Yeah.
Almost like back in
Well, you've seen it so many times, you know all the images. So it's very easy to put it all together, and it's funny every single time.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember
really enjoyed
that
it.
movie probably being one of the earliest moments that I realized what the power of sound was and what the power of not sound was. Not those moments where you don't have anything playing, like in music where you have the moment where the music quits before it kicks in on the chorus. It's just the vocals, right?
Everybody gets high, everybody gets low, everybody gets...
It's those kinds of moments. It's the same thing because I can't remember Chevy's character's name in the movie, though. Anyway, when he's doing a symposium, answering questions to reporters, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the
Acts like
spokesman.
Mike's cutting out. I'm awfully sorry.
Yeah, welcome to the BEDINGHAUS. My brother band, long time ago.
How can you say we aren't spending millions on spraying extensive contamination in the grain fields of southern Argentina?
The state microphone's cutting out on us, so I'm awfully sorry. However, it's an unstate, so I must go.
And he would just do that, and he wouldn't ever really say anything, so he wouldn't give him any details. But I realized at that moment, wow, the things that you don't say are pretty impactful too.
It's the yada, 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 you know?
I do, ironically, though, I remember the character's name in the movie Fletch.
I think that was...
Irwin M. Fletcher.
That... Talk about ASMR. The first, 10 minutes of that movie was just that... dee. Well, I was about to do Beverly Hills Cop. But it's the same. It's a similar feel of a little bit. You know, that little background music.
And he's walking on the beach.
Yes. You hear the sounds of the beach and seagulls and water going. Then he goes under the bridge and you hear kind of the muffled sound of people on the bridge. And just perfect. I mean, I barely ever made it past probably the first 5 minutes.
No, it was unnecessary.
What, the rest of the movie?
Well, I mean, I'm sure the writers felt that it was necessary. No, I just mean because it was this mood thing of you heard that intro, and I would just start laughing just because I knew how funny it was going to be in the next 30 seconds.
And you were anticipating, that joyful.
Still to this day, almost not a week goes by, I feel like I don't make the joke of...
He does. Even I found myself thinking that in my head a lot of times.
Even when I don't say it?
In that voice, yeah.
Anyway, so I thought it would be really cool to have you in. And because, I mean, you are my brother. We've played in many bands together.
That's true.
And I think, when I got your list, so to dive into kind of what your influences were was interesting, just to have it come back to me, because I kind of felt some of them, but some of them not necessarily. And so anyway, I thought it'd be cool to kind of go through some influential drummers. It's going to be a modified 5 for 5 today. There was a lot to unpack on this list, so we made the decision, an executive decision.
Well, we knew Bret was going to have lots to say, so we wanted to give him the opportunity.
Well, I will give it to Chris. She's the one that came to me and was like, hey, there's a lot here. She always has to reel me back. I'm like, I wrote down 472 things I'm going to do today. She's like, well, how about we just start with one and see how you're doing by noon?
Yeah.
Normally I don't have that one thing done.
We're going to shoot for 3.
Yeah.
I have, on occasion, been accused of talking a little much.
I mean, me too. I think it's a BEDINGHAUS trait.
Well, it's just because everything I have to say is important.
That's his truth.
And often, and really most often, more important than what anyone else has to say. Yeah, no, this is not grade school, how appropriate etiquette. All that stuff was lost on me. Say whatever you can to make the person you're talking to look stupid.
Or feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, or they just outright quit and walk away. And
then you win.
And I win. Yeah, I do. I win every single time.
It's funny that he's talking like that, like, yeah, I'll offend you, whatever, because he used to get really frustrated at Drew and I when we would play shows and just sit up there and like do a George Carlin curse words routine.
I get tired of people talking about bad words and bad language. Bullshit. It's the context that makes them good or bad. The context that makes
for 10 minutes in between each song, and he'd be like, dude, can you just not say fuck every other third word?
You're like, no, it's impossible.
No, it has to come out.
We're artists.
Well, this list, enter segue. It's funny that you say that, because this list kind of represents my perspective on that take on what live rock and roll is supposed to be. And my drumming has been more influenced by what the spectacle and the show and all these things, just as much as, capabilities and technique. You'll see on the list, it's I kind of waffle back and forth, right? I get this thing that's like this huge mega impact kind of, whether it's a performance or a character or whatever, and then you see I get kind of sucked back in by technical capabilities, and I kind of waffle back and forth, and I have, for 35 years, what inspires me to play is a little different.
Yeah, I'm sure it's more
given that
time.
moment,
yeah,
and especially now than it was 30 years ago or 5 years ago, and so the list kind of represents a little bit of that too, where it's pretty obvious what things are impactful and make me go, oh yeah, that's cool, I want to do that. So it's a good segue.
Yeah.
That wasn't even on your notes, was it?
Nope.
Your perceptions too at different points in your life and experiences at that time also kind of put you, or the universal you, into different mindsets, so now as a more knowledgeable, musician, you are going to hear things differently, feel things differently, experience things differently than 20 years ago.
And just as an older man, you listen for different things too now, or not necessarily now, but just as you grew.
Well, yeah, what the drums were supposed to sound like, what they meant to the song, what was, playing versus overplaying, and I think your perspective of those things changes along the way. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that, for me, it always kind of gets rooted back into, the spectacle of the show and the performance. And I wanted, even playing a little in a small club, I wanted it to be like,
right?
This, you come out and you got this well-timed, well-choreographed display, as much as, hey, here are these notes that I'm going to play. And I think that's been a good thing for me, but it's definitely been a bad thing for my capabilities over the years, because I overlook sometimes the technicalities of playing and didn't really embrace, how do I get to this next level consistently. It was only at times that technique and skill kind of sucked me in versus just this overall sound of this massive song. instruments and the lights and all these things that were, to me, what made up what drumming was.
So let me ask you this. I've often wondered, I want to get your honest, true kind of opinion on this. Do you ever feel like liking that well choreographed show, though, sometimes put you in a box? Because part of us playing in Core Factor, it was the positive and the negative all wrapped in one, where it was so awesome to be able to have cool beats and synth playing right with us and just perfectly timed cool stuff like that. But Bret had to suffer some for that, because he had to sit there and listen to what we used, a cowbell, so it was loud enough in his ears, but keeping the click track while we played. And so there's always going to be this just little bit of hesitation to kind of break out and just be free a little bit, Do you ever kind of feel like that held you back? I feel like it probably did.
It held me back playing wise, obviously, because I had to, in my mind's eye, I had to fit this very specific role. And really even more detrimental to that is when you do that, now you're literally standing on the razor's edge. Because I'm not having any fun, like when you're just jamming and you just kind of get in this moment. You're trying to put on a performance, and that in and of itself is fun. But what happens when the performance is not perfect? It's now just complete shit.
Right.
If we didn't pull it off exactly the way it was supposed to be, now all of a sudden it's just garbage to me.
Whereas if you're not playing with that, sometimes those moments that go off track are the cool things.
They almost always are.
To do that, yeah.
They almost always are, and there's no real method to kind of respond to the crowd in the same way that you can when you kind of let that all just kind of happen organically.
I've always personally wrestled with it because me as a human, I mean, Chris, you know this, I'm best when I'm just kind of ad-libbing. And just responding
it's actually pretty amazing.
And riffing.
It's like his superpower.
When I tried it, when we first started recording the podcast, and I would have these detailed outlines, and it never felt natural. Yeah, exactly. And also, it's like I feel like, I have to respond with this when all the things that came to my brain in the moment are way better to say, right? At the same time, I like things to be super well choreographed, like you said, whether that's the show or the music or everything's in sync. Even if it's raw, it's organically raw together and not like rubbing each other the wrong way.
Yeah, but you like the cohesive elements.
Yeah. So all my career, I like fucking fought that. Like I want it to be super on and just technically great and cool, but all the cool moments are when I'm not in that mode and I'm just jamming.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a wasted opportunity, because you put so much time into that, and it could have been even more fun. Not that wasn't fun, because when you did nail it, and you came out, and there's, and it was never about being better than another band, or because every performance has something great about it. But when the band comes out and it's a three-piece,
when you nail being unique,
and it's they not against them, but they just sounded like every other late '90s rock band.
Yeah,
and then we came out and did what really was only happening at that time on the big stage.
Yeah, right,
and to pull that off, and when we really did it right, and you see people's faces, and they're just like, "Holy shit!" That's just so different and so much
level.
Not better than the other band, but it's just something. You're delivering something that's just more. It's bigger. It's more fulfilling in the sound spectrum, the layers and the thickness. But what if every audience member didn't get off on that? So that was where it's kind of the lost art of just performing and engaging with the people in the audience. Is we had to assume every audience member was going to get off on what we were trying to do and hope that we delivered it. And and it turns out it was like 2 people.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
What,
the
who
rest of the audience
appreciated or
was just
Yeah.
wank off, man. When hey, drum solo, it's not fucking written on my list.
Yeah. It doesn't.
I only
Drum
have-
solo isn't until song 8.
Right, I only have 16 seconds before the synth kicks in for the next intro
exactly.
on the next song. There was no time to kind of engage in that, but like I said, when you nailed it,
Yeah.
it was something more and bigger. Now everybody does it, right? And
Well, and back then too, it was, I think I mentioned this on Stacy's episode that people wanted metal or country in Dallas.
They had
They
very
didn't want
specific.
in between or mixing genres. Like that wasn't a thing yet. Now it's just music. Nobody cares. But
no,
back then it was like, what are you trying to do?
What are you, a rap band?
Yeah.
What label are you?
Are you screaming? You did kind of a country slow song in there. I don't know what y'all are.
But that's what the audience, that was their mindset, right? And there are people out there that at a time when record labels were a real thing, their job was to know what that audience was like. And was always the part that killed me, that made me quit playing for so long when Core Factor died, because we go in the studio and we produce these, what I thought were fantastic versions of a couple of the songs. Send them off to the labels, and we've got Wind Up and a couple other labels that were interested, and then they just kind of disappeared. Well, and what was happening at that time is, here's Dallas, right? There's this Dallas has always had its own ecosystem for music, right? And it has its own ebb and flow, and you just had a couple of bands kind of break out and get signed nationally, which was Edgewater and
Ryan's, our buddy Ryan, Element 80.
Yeah.
I actually saw them play.
Yeah, and they were doing some great things.
A couple others at that same time.
Yeah, and ironically, the bass player for Edgewater went on to become really good friends with Ray, who we'll talk about later. So it's just the small
I'm
world.
excited about that. 6
The
degrees.
small, right? Yeah, but there was a 6 degrees of the audience too.
Yeah.
And the A&R reps were responsible for knowing what are those 6 degrees.
Right.
What are those 6 things, those 6 elements of a song that are going to make them go spend their $13. Mm-hmm. And they just kind of disappeared. Oh, we love this stuff. We're super interested. And then just radio silence. And then like a month later, we get a phone call and it's like, my senior manager has decided that we just aren't going to sign anybody out of Dallas. Because Edgewater, the plug was pulled halfway into the first tour.
Oh, really?
Element 80, they're on the road for a few months doing a bunch of stuff.
Well, essentially, I mean, it's what have you done for me lately?
It didn't sell enough albums in the first 6 months. And if you didn't sell the right number in those first 6 months, unless there was a really
audience must not be there, so screw it.
Yeah, so abandon ship.
I mean,
cut their losses.
As a listener, as an audience, member, it sometimes takes a while for people to catch on, especially before technology.
That's a great concept, right?
Yeah,
because you look at it and you go, okay, A&R rep's supposed to know the audience, right? Know what to sell the audience, but that's not really what happened.
Right.
What really happened for the greater part of 30 years from, early 80s till, maybe 10 years ago, is the A&R reps told you what you were going to listen to.
Yeah.
And then they did a version of it that was 3 minutes and 15 seconds, and it got played on the radio so many times that you had to like it, or you had to turn the radio off, right?
Yeah.
And this was before digital airwaves, and so you're on. If you weren't digging,
it was
what
like
was
subliminal.
on the radio.
To your point, the script was flipped a little bit to whereas when we talk about some of these people on your list back in the day, record labels developed them. They paid for them to go on tour and put promo out there so they would catch on. But when our buddies and the bands that Bret's referencing, by that time, it was more like, okay, you have to go earn the following and then we'll invest money. It was a completely different model.
Yeah, and I still talk to Ryan some, not a lot, but he and I still communicate from time to time. And the last.
Ryan was the drummer in Element 80, and
did I meet him?
Well, he was from Tyler.
Yeah.
At,
From Tyler. Well, they all
at
were,
one
I
of
guess.
Daniel's gigs, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, the whole 6 Degrees thing, right? When he was a young kid, like 16, 17, maybe 18, he would sub for Core Factor.
Yeah.
Oh,
Back
The
when we were-
original drummer
yeah.
Okay.
wasn't available.
Back when we were doing the college circuit
Yeah.
at parties.
So,
Oh, okay.
so Ryan would come in and play when Spencer couldn't, from something would work or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started subbing some from time to time,
Right.
and then that's when it finally evolved into me playing full time. But when Ryan and those guys split, they got like I don't remember what, like maybe a $300,000 advance, right? And that's when you go buy all new gear
Right.
and you buy your trailer and your new truck and your van and you spend all this money to get out on the road and become famous. And so what happens in those days, and you hear about it a lot with 30 Seconds to Mars, the big lawsuits and stuff.
Yeah.
A typical record deal is structured something like this. The record label gives in advance, say, $250,000 to the artist to record an album. The artist then records the album. Suppose that the album sells 500,000 copies at $10 each, yielding $5 million. The record label then takes their cut out of the $5 million, typically 85% of the total sales, leaving the artist with $750,000. But before the artist receives any payments, the label first deducts the advance. In addition, the record label recoups other costs such as recording costs, half the promotion costs, half the video costs, and tour support. This leaves the artist $425,000 in debt to the record label. And then this debt gets carried on to the next album, and the next album.
On a small scale, it was still happening too, so those guys go out, they do this advance, they go out to LA, record a great album, and do some really cool stuff, get out on the road with Seven Dust, and then a few months into it, the label says, hey, we're not sending you any more money.
Yeah, so then you're stuck.
I hope you can, good luck finding gas money to get all your shit back to Dallas and lick your wounds. Oh, by the way, we're going to be sending you a letter because you now owe us $300,000.
Right. Or the difference, probably, right?
No, the whole thing. So if you didn't pay it off through
it's not
sale,
like prorated.
well, yeah, they probably sold enough to pay some small
expenses.
Yeah.
But it was from their portion was pennies, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, now they're spending the next 20 years, paying the record label for something that they never even got.
Well, that's what it makes.
It's a win-win for the record label.
It is.
Let's see if we can't just brainstorm and find some creative alternatives that are win-win.
Win.
Yes, thank you, Pam.
And but you know what? That's one of the things that I am so glad that technology and the digital age has really been able to balance that, because those corporations or labels, whatever, that were controlling the industry, they don't have that much control anymore.
They'll get it back.
You think?
Yeah, because eventually they'll own all the streaming services and so on.
I think as long as digital and technology is around, there'll always be a better access to the underground than there ever was before.
Which is interesting, right? Because I feel like growing up watching Dad hustle all the time, start up businesses, win an audience, exactly, all the time. That's just in our nature to kind of hustle, which gives us a competitive advantage at times, or did in the past. So, in other words, before people could have access 24/7 to all kinds of cool stuff, it helped me to be able to go out and hustle and spin things up or learn a new technology and work that in our advantage. Before, now everybody can do it. It's almost like capitalist versus socialist a little bit, where right?
Now
like it's
so
all
cheap.
even playing.
Everybody gets in-ear monitors and backing tracks for free, basically. Now, here, everyone has them. Now go play.
I'm Jonas. Do you know what open source is? Well, let me explain it for you. Basically, it means that the recipe of any given work is shared and free for anybody to use. The essential benefits of open source are access to the source or recipe of any given work, free remix and redistribution of any given work, an end to predatory vendor lock-in, and a higher degree of cooperation. Open source is originally a software-related term. But let's take a non-technical example of where the open source mindset is actually used today. Here's Dave. He is a really passionate skateboarder. He loves the community because everyone shares tips and tricks openly. This means that everybody has access to the source of becoming a better skateboarder. Dave has the opportunity of remixing an existing trick and making it even better. He becomes more skilled, faster. In the skateboard community, you share new ideas and remix each other's tricks. You cooperate and reach much higher standards than any skateboarder could reach alone. Hopefully, you can now better understand the positive term open source and the principles within.
Which is kind of funny because
Like open
on
source.
one side, it levels out a little bit, and now it's like, okay, nobody's above anybody, but yet it allows now for the ramp to really let talented people shine,
Yep.
because now they're not held back because they don't have the best gear anymore. So now you give people who don't have those options before those options
An
and the
edge.
ability. Front runners still come out. They still develop themselves.
At the end of the day, even as shitty as the record business was, and probably will forever be in whatever element that a company is controlling it versus the artist, talent always prevailed.
Yeah.
Right.
To a certain degree. But part of that talent, for me, was the show.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
The ability to go out there and present a spectacle and a sound that's bigger and larger than life, that was bigger than just those four guys on the stage. And that's where it all started for me.
A sound that could control the crowd. The showmanship of it. You're definitely a showman too. Like, not everybody is.
No, and I'll give you a real quick
shows.
example, and then I'll kind of jump into why that's so important to me. Is, there's some great bands out there, and in today's world, right? This is not a podcast about who's the best drummer,
Right.
That
It's a
you
podcast
have
about fun.
the old
Exactly.
the age-old debate: was it John Bonham or Neil Peart, right? And that's probably a great discussion to have sometime. But the reality is that in today's world, there are so many freaks of nature.
Oh my gosh. And we just celebrate the differences, not a comparison of better than or,
And they're all good.
Yeah.
That's what's so crazy. But
Young people, too, like
and I
little
look back,
kids.
and that for me was one of the things that, I didn't have access to a lot of technical learning, if you will.
Right.
And so I just kind of, not purposefully or willfully moved away from it. It just, because it wasn't present and available, it wasn't important to me. It
wasn't a focus.
But now these kids come out there and they go, oh, how do I play, how do I play that drum pattern that Bonham's doing on Moby Dick? And they can pull it up on YouTube, and there's a guy showing them how to play it at 6 different tempos. It's transcribed at the bottom of the screen, so you can literally see every note, every rest, every aspect of that performance, and then they break it down and teach it to you. Well, when I was learning to play drums, what you did is you hit the stop button and the rewind button
Yes, oh my God.
at the same time.
Yeah.
With the rewind just a little bit down so that you could rewind and then stop real quick.
Yep.
And it was like this, positioning of the 2 fingers that allowed you to rewind it exactly 4 seconds and stop it and then push play again. And when it worked, you got to go back and listen to this piece again. But most of the time, it didn't work. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, that was my only access to how do I learn that one little part, and
It's so time-consuming,
You're
too.
completely limited to how was that album mixed, and if the drums weren't mixed out front and center, you couldn't even hear a lot of what was going on that was kind of the coolest parts. Whereas now these kids are learning all these coolest parts right from the beginning.
Yeah. And most of the time you wouldn't even get half of those coolest parts because your speakers didn't play that spectrum.
Yeah.
So you literally wouldn't even hear parts of it.
No, you're literally playing it on a little jam box.
Yeah.
Or a record, you know.
Yeah.
Just, bumping the needle on the record back and forth. And today's world, same thing. Like everybody has this access to the digital technology to have these great performances. They also have access to all these technologies to break down and learn the true mechanics and techniques.
The logistics.
And when I was young, they said, hey, be sure to learn all your rudiments. Right. And I was like, yeah, but that's not all that fun. So put on the AC/DC album again. And let me just play along to it. And so that became my default was let me do something that's performance-wise is really going to shine because maybe I don't have those technical chops. Not that I couldn't have learned those things.
Right.
I accepted not being able to.
You just didn't have the exposure to the knowledge at that time.
And then, and you did if you went to MI out in L.A.
Right.
And had all these great instructors teaching you all these great things. Well, now you can get that on the internet.
Right.
But our brother John goes to L.A. and he's at MI and learning all these different types of music and different techniques and all the behind the scene things that make a player not only good but able to use it in a lot of different forums, right? So what happens is I'm playing, Motley Crue.
Right.
And it's just boom da ba-doom da boom da boom boom da.
I want you, I need you, I want you to be my tonight.
And for my birthday, and this is like 1987, he sends me a cassette tape. And it's Billy Cobham's Glass Menagerie. It's like this amazing jazz guy, and it's like one of his crowning albums, in my opinion. Going back and listening now, it's just this amazing playing, but it's all heavy jazz influenced stuff. And John's like, "Hey, you learn this, then you can be really good." And I listened to it like 2 times, and I was like, "Fuck you!" Boom, da, boom.
I want to twirl my sticks cool while I play this simple beat.
This Billy Cobham guy is not drinking tequila. There are no naked women on this album. I have no use for it.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, looking back, you go, you did all these missed opportunities to be technically a better player, and you still have those now. It's like even now, I have opportunity to learn stuff, and I don't know that I embrace it as much as maybe a lot of other players might, because that's kind of part of my DNA now. Is it's more important to me to just have this cool feel and the vibe and the presence and the performance and the presentation was just as important, and it started right from the very beginning.